Okay, let's carry on and look at these other terms. We talked about deep grammar, but deep grammar is really going to be centered on the clause. I think that, well, I better scratch that. The clause is step number one to really mastering deep grammar and learning how to recognize a clause, understanding its ubiquity, knowing its essence of um, an historic happening, right? So something happens, it's going to involve the subject um, that has a truth value. All right, it could be true or false when you utter that happening. I ate, true or false. The rain fell, true or false. Okay. Now you might not be able to ascertain right then and there what that truth value is because you might not have the information or whatnot, but you can see that in essence the thing has a truth value. You might not know it, but you know it's going to have a truth value. Truth values are verity and falsity. Okay, so once you start recognizing the clauses in being able to really do that, you can move forward with a lot of direction and you know in the right way, I would say, in learning how to think about grammar at this deep level. Okay, so clauses are always going to have a subject and a predicate. Now, a simple clause is just that; it's just the subject and the main verb. Okay, so I've got these things close together, but I said things that were like, okay, clause is a subject predicate, and then a simple clause has a subject and a main verb. Is the main verb the same as the predicate? Well, no, it isn't. Okay, but here's something that's important. Every predicate is going to have a main verb. Okay, every predicate has a main verb, but the main verb alone is not necessarily always the predicate because the predicate might have other words involved like modal words, adverbs, adjectives, prepositional phrases that are all linked to that pairing of the subject and the main verb. Okay, so once you begin looking for a clause, the best way to do it is to try to find that main verb, and I call it a main verb because it's always going to have these aspects to it. Now at this point we've talked only about three, but three more are coming. Person, number, tense. All right, voice, mood, and aspect. But tense is the important one for finding the main verb because that's the time test, right? If you're looking at a bunch of words together, which is your approach to clausal grammar, by the way. Clausal grammar means you're always looking at a collection of words and you're saying, is this a clause? Because if you look at a word in isolation, you don't know what it is, right? You might realize it has 3 definitions, 5 definitions, 8 definitions, but you don't know exactly what it is because you don't see it in use in that particular use of the utterance that you're examining. And we can get just floor. The word floor. Is it a noun or a verb? Okay, hopefully you don't answer it because you don't know. It's not in use, so you don't know. It could be the floor is cold. In that case, what's the verb, right? Is, was, will be. What is the floor? So you got your verb and you got your subject, the floor. So at that point, because all subjects are nouns, okay, but not all nouns are subjects. We'll get to that later. Yes, the floor there is a noun, okay. But what about he floored the audience, okay, or I will floor them, by astonishing them. Okay, at that case, you got the past tense, you got the future tense, right? That's a verb. In that case, floor is a verb. Okay, um, so it could also be other things in different situations. So you would never, I would say, don't ever study grammar with trying to look at words in isolation. Okay, there are a few types of words that might work like that, like the articles a, an, and the. Very rarely will you see those as any other function as an article. Okay, good. Go memorize that list. There you go. What about the coordinating conjunctions, right? For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Those will, you can memorize those. And there's always going to be a coordinating conjunction. But all the other words, you got to be really careful about them, right? So it's much better to study grammar in terms of a collection of words, you got this sentence in front of you or whatever it is, and then you're trying to figure out, well, where's the clause? Where's the main verb? Who or what verb? There's your subject. That must be a noun, and you can move on from there, right? You find the subject predicate through that. So the verb is extremely important, and we talked about person, number, tense, simple and perfect. Now, I prefer to say simple and complex because I want to talk about those two events, that the complex version, the tense of the verb, is always relating to it, one to the other, right? And complex just simply means not simple. It just means two or more. So you got your simple tense, you got your perfect tense. I would call it the complex tense, but people will call it perfect tense. They'll call it preterite, the preterite tense. Okay, we talked about that already. We'll talk about voice, mood, and aspect coming up, but that's what verbs carry. As far as these videos go, we're not going to go any further into verbs than person, number, tense, voice, mood, aspect. You got to remember that, those 6 things. Come up with an acronym, okay? Please note the very modest adder or whatever, asp. Let's say I'm afraid of snakes, so I'm going to pretend there's a snake on the floor. Please note the very modest adder. Okay, that's dumb. You know what I'm saying? It's silly. It's effective. I'll never, I remember these 6 by please note the very modest adder. So, think of something that works for you, but you got to memorize these. You got to be able to say the 6 dimensions of a verb, okay? Aspects. No, not aspects. Don't want to use aspect, but facets. 6 items of information. Maybe that's the best way to say it, because each one of these is carrying information, right? Now, the beauty of some ancient languages, Greek, Latin, Hebrew, is that heavily inflected languages, is that they can roll all 6 of these into one word, a 10-letter word, and there it is. It's got person, number, tense, voice, mood, aspect, all there, So you're going to have to be able to understand these terms and to know what they relate to, what they're talking about. This information is very often conveyed by inflection, word order, or modals, okay? So I don't have a simple term to characterize these because I haven't thought through it that far, but this is information carrying devices, methods, okay? An inflected language is going to take a word like a verb, and it's going to work with prefixes, suffixes, infixes, internal changes, and you're going to be left with one word at the end, but it's going to be a different version of the original word, the core word, if you will. And it will somehow, with that one word, carry all this information, and you'll be able to recognize, oh, well, there's that, and there's this, and this one word. That means the mood is here, the voice is here, and it's a beautiful thing. It really is. But for English, which depends very much on word order and modals, we just do it in phrases. The phrases get longer and longer, But anyway, now what is a sentence? That's a really good question there, because sometimes I've already caught myself twice throwing it in there. One in this very video a couple minutes ago, and I don't want you to think it's the same as a clause. Okay, so the definition we're going to run with here is that a sentence is a collection of words that have boundaries. They're bounded at the beginning with end stop punctuation from the previous collection, or with nothing. Like they might be the first sentence in a paragraph, so there's nothing in front of it. Okay. But as they come to an end, it has end stop. Now, English has 3 marks of punctuation that we use as end stop. This is contemporary grammar, because you're going to have to figure out what the end stops are for Greek or for Latin, for Hebrew. Okay. But end stop is, for English, is the period, the question mark, and the exclamation mark. So for English, right, a sentence is anything between 2 end stops. If it's at the very beginning of a paragraph or at the very end, then you don't have end stops, because you don't need to distinguish it from another sentence. You see what I'm saying? Now, standard rules for English say that we capitalize the first word of a sentence. So sometimes the rule would be, well, capitalize. But see, Greek doesn't capitalize, so the first word. Neither does Latin, I don't think. It's been a while since I've looked at the capitalization rules for the sentences in language. in Latin. The point is, that I would say is the standard rule. The deep grammar is going to be, it's tricky. It's actually tricky. I should have thought a little bit more about this, but if you look at the word root of sentence, it talks about opinion. Sententiae is just opinions. So this is where we get our current idea that a sentence is a complete sentence. A complete thought, which is just so bad. I really don't like that, because once you start thinking seriously about it, it just falls apart. The cat. Doesn't that describe a complete entity? Isn't that one thought you can hold in your mind? But see, the cat doesn't have a truth value. If I were to say to you, the cat, true or false, you wouldn't be able to answer the question. The cat's not even a clause. Okay. So, yeah, as far as deep grammar goes, I would say let's not even worry about sentences. We're talking about clauses, okay? As far as contemporary grammar goes, for English, for our purposes here, a sentence is going to be anything that's bounded between two end stops. And I would say that as soon as marks of punctuation enter the written version of the language, because just the way we have it, the vast majority of languages start off as oral and verbal, and then they develop their script. And then once you get the script done, then punctuation and diacritics come in later, okay? And as soon as you start seeing punctuation, you're going to have end stops. And as soon as you find the end stops, then you can say that's the stuff between the end stops is a sentence. So I threw it in there because obviously it's a very common term in grammar. All right, so we need to talk about it. For our purposes, it's actually a very minor term, because it kind of disappears when you go into deep grammar. Deep grammar is all about the clause. It's not about the sentencing. So interesting. But because it's such a common phrase, common word, I felt like I needed to kind of throw it in there when I'm talking about terms so we can kind of discuss it and get it out of the way. All right. Hey, thanks for watching.